Eight. Oh, one of my favorites. I'm so glad you chose this one. This is a good place for us to get started. So number 28 is I'm going to shake your hand 3 times. The first time your eyes will get tired, let them. The second time they'll want to close, let them. The third time they will lock and you won't be able to open them. Want that to happen and watch it happen. Now, one, two, now close your eyes. Now three, and they're locked, and you'll find they just won't work, no matter how hard you try.
So the first quote I want to read is from Dave Elman. Dave Elman writes, I insist that my students learn hypnotizing by hypnotizing, not just listening to a lecture or reading a textbook. Because they say experience is the best teacher. To me, as far as inducing hypnosis goes, it's the only teacher. Isn't that a cool quote? We learn by doing.
This is exactly what I was talking about at the beginning when I said when I first read Elman, I just thought, no, it can't be that easy. You can't just say something, say what you're going to do, and then pin a non-volitional experience, like the eyes being stuck together, on the end of it. However, this has actually become one of my favorite inductions.
Now, at the time, Dave Elman was kind of out there and he was writing his book, women were very much there for their husband's pleasure. Decent women were not seen to be sexual until they were married. But another interesting fact, at that time, 40% of brides were actually pregnant. So it tells us that, people were doing things, but there was still this kind of great stigma and shame attached around sex and sexuality. Homosexuality was illegal. So when people talk about, Dave Elman being homophobic, actually at the time, homosexuality was illegal. And actually, I'll tell you the story in the moment in the book where he worked with a homosexual gentleman, and actually what comes through was a great compassion to help somebody. And actually, as I tell you the story in a moment, you'll see that actually, he believed that people would find the answer to this. It's just that the answer wasn't quite what he was expecting. So again, just to set the scene a little bit so you can kind of see why we should be still using a lot of this stuff within our work.
Do you still have family down the Amazon?
No. Most of my family are in São Paulo and Rio. I go to the Amazon. I said that many young people, the teenagers, have depression since they see no future for them. They want to study, they want to become doctors, they want to become professional. And living in the Amazon, they see there's no hope, there's nothing to do. And then I tell them my story. I was born in a small city, that's Santarém, in a very simple house. I lived there. I lived there for 9 years, and then I came to São Paulo. I studied, and I share with them my story as I was able to study, to grow, to become a professional, and then go back to the same area where I came from and help them with the gifts that I have as medical doctor and hypnotherapist.
The virtual background I love for things like when I'm monitoring a room, because I can put the background back there and forget about it. But the pandemic did something very interesting for me, actually. Let me show you this if I can. When the pandemic came along, it seemed to me that it was a little more important to show that I had a real brick and mortar office. And when Zoom became so popular and everybody started having these virtual backgrounds and green screens, nobody believed them anymore. That lowered the believability, right? The first time that I used this green screen, this real office and not a green screen, I was doing a workshop with Jason Linett. And we were online a little bit early, and Jason said, "Yeah, Karen, go touch that pillow back there." I went, "Okay." I can do that because I'm in a real room.
In our profession, we have this sort of split dialogue that it's either hypnosis or it's hypnotherapy. And yes, there's some dialogues around these different words as different countries, different states, even in the USA, have different regulations. But for our conversation here, let's look at it from the mindset that hypnosis is the getting the client into hypnosis, which is why we can just call that hypnosis. And for our dialogue here, hypnotherapy is now what we do with that person once they're actually in the process. The way that Cheryl and Larry, and I think Sean here and I have also bonded over the years by at times accidentally naming some of the presentations. We've done the same things without realizing the other came up with the name first. My client's now hypnotized. What do? I think at least all of us have done at some point in our different presentations over the years. But this idea that from that quote, there's no way you cannot hypnotize a patient. Yes, for most of our dialogue now, we would talk about it in terms of it being a client. Same basic idea. That's just, again, accepted terminology. But this idea that the same ways to get the client into the change process actually now become the same way to do the change process itself.
And because my business, it runs very well, I can give the time to help the people who wouldn't normally be able to access the services. So I'll take hypnosis into businesses. Businesses today are really struggling because of the pandemic. There are always winners and losers, but there will be businesses that are struggling, that they need help with their focus, their creativity, and their determination and their resilience to build back better. And Dave Elman saw the possibilities of hypnosis.
And cancer at the moment is the real pandemic. Everybody is sort of panicking about COVID, but cancer is the real pandemic because COVID's had a huge effect on cancer patients. In the UK, we've got 250,000 patients have had their tests for cancer, their diagnosis delayed. So they're not having their diagnoses done. And now, as we know, early detection is paramount with cancer. So not being early detected, that's going to cause more deaths going along. I know treatment all around the world is being delayed. I've heard Canada, for example, it was up to a year. I know in parts of the US, it's quite lengthy. And really think of the psychological cause and the impact that psychologically this is going to have on cancer patients going forward. It's going to have a huge impact on them. So we're going to be needed more than ever.
I do a lot of stories. I tend to wrap things around a story. So I'll use a version of control room, but I've wrapped it around a whole story, because when you tell clients stories, they become really engaged, and it helps them to forget what they're there for, so they follow along with the story more, so they become more engrossed, so they take it on board, if you see what I mean.
And just watching stuff she was doing, I was like, this is exactly what I need. So anyway, I went onto a little course, and I learned the Elman induction, and that's really how the journey began. And then I became a lecturer in the hospital in the Department of Sedation and Special Care, where we get referred all these wonderful patients who've been in the system from the 1970s, and all they get given is drugs. They come in for their fix. They get sedated. They have an acute dental problem. The dental problem's treated. And then they're sent back to the referring dentist, who now thinks, well, my patient is a special care patient, which means I can only send them to the special care department for drugs. Patients love it because they're getting the drugs for free. They're not paying for it. It's on the NHS. But we're actually serving no one. We're not making any change for them. And I said to the team, well, come on, guys, there must be more to this. Let's try and introduce some of this hypnotherapy. And you guys I'm still learning from all of you, and the results you guys get, we're starting to see them in the hospital. So that's my journey. And as Juan says, we've started the course. We trained our first cohort of dentists recently, and hopefully we can all collaborate and enhance our patients' experience.
So what my advice is for the hypnotherapists, don't be afraid to go to dental office to propose your service, because it's a great improvement, you know, for the patient and for the dental team. And also the other part that Daryl was saying is very interesting, is that most of the dentists that I know are working, and after 20 or 30 years, they are quite very burnout, you know, because it's a very specific work, you know, and Munir could say the same, because there's a lot of tension. We are working on small tooth, you know, all the day, and the patient that fear. So and the neuroscience show that the environment is very complicated for our brain. So that's how also dentists should learn self-hypnosis for themselves, for their team. And there is also the nurse, which is working with us, and it's all the team that must make I would say, accept the entire world of hypnosis at the office. And the team must be trained, you know, from the receptionist to the nurse which is working. And my nurse personally, she makes sometimes better hypnosis than me, you know.
But we can learn from some of the things of Dave Elman, not just about his hypnosis work, but things that made him successful. And really fairly simple things that we could all do that help not just us, but the education of the public about what hypnosis can do to help them.
Elman established and made regression to cause and fix it really well known. But it was also Elman who found a reliable way into the S-Dale state. Before, it took days, it took a long time until people were able to go down to the S-Dale state. It was again Dave Elman who developed a fast track down into the S-Dale state. I just finished a class yesterday, actually a live class. We were wearing masks, and we have it now down to the point when they were in the Elman induction, we just anchor it and they go down into the S-Dale state within seconds. So and even using self-hypnosis techniques, it is possible. And we owe this to Elman, actually.
The hypnotic coma. I'm very glad that today we call it the S-Dale state, because the words hypnotic coma would panic an audience, would scare an individual client. And as I understand it, in some cases in some Western towns, if a hypnotist had an unexpected hypnotic coma up on the stage, he'd say to the theater owner, "Don't worry about it. The guy will sleep it off. Let's just lock up the theater. We'll come in tomorrow morning and give him a good breakfast of ham and eggs." And the local sheriff would step forward and say, "Good plan, but I think you leak your ham and eggs in the county jail till we're sure the guy's okay." That happened just often enough so that the very idea of the hypnotic coma scared the heck out of the entire hypnosis industry.
And then there's the problem of getting somebody out of the S-Dale state. And that again was an Elman, but this time it was Pauline Elman who found a reliable way that we nowadays call the coma warning. She found the way out of the S-Dale state. So Elman developed hypno-sleep.
You know, COVID has enlightened us, right?
Yes.
To the really extreme. So where is it going to go after it gets back supposedly to normal?
You know, our company is global, and even though we may travel, although travel is getting harder as we're getting older, you know, and they're making it less comfortable to travel on flights. Grant's going, "We want you back in the UK." So I see that there are going to be many hypnotists that will choose to continue working online. I think some people prefer to do it online. They don't have to leave anywhere. So I think I think there'll be a change. I don't think there'll ever be what we call back to normal, because normal, I don't think will ever totally be the same. People have gotten into different modes. I love teaching on Zoom.
Let me footnote that a little bit, honey.
Sure.
What I believe is that you will have a mixture of virtual, like here, and of real. And I think the trick that will make that
hybrid
work, right?
Hybrid
is a good word for it. The trick that will make that work is something my wife thought of. She's brilliant. She's absolutely brilliant. I think I ought to keep her. You notice we have rooms set aside to act as a cafe and to act as just a gathering place. The idea was, Cheryl said, what we miss in a virtual one is being able to gather, to be able to network. And she's right.
When I see that the big mistake are the parents in terms of behaving, and I see the parents are behaving for example, we work something in the therapy, and the parents work in the opposite way in the next week. And how do you deal with this? How do you confront the parents? Because I've already had the experience of telling the parents, you should stop doing this.
And
I lost the client. How do you deal with this?
Yeah, you do have to be careful in how you word it, because you don't want to antagonize the parents. But sometimes it's obviously a parent that's feeling anxious or is not working in the child's best interest. So I will start with things like, perhaps you would like to also listen to the MP3 recordings at home with your child, and I'll recommend that they do that, and that is something that they do as a family group. But I have at various times met with the parents on their own. Sometimes as a couple, I'll say, I really need to speak to you guys on your own. And I will confront them, and I'll say, it seems to me, you're bringing your child for treatment here, and you're paying this money to help your child, and yet you are not helping your child do the homework, or you're not reminding the child. If the child is very young, they're going to need reminding, or even as teenagers, they're perhaps not going to want to do it, especially if they feel that their parents have dragged them along to a meeting. So I have had meetings with one or both parents on their own, and I will confront them. And sometimes you do get those parents who are listening outside the door and think that you're doing something subversive, or the parents themselves have mental health problems. I had one child with IBS whose parents were both drug addicts, and I was seeing her on her own, but you're going back to a toxic environment. So if the children are, 13, 14, 15, and they're living at home and they're well aware of their parents' toxicity, I just have to reassure them that, yeah, your life really does suck at the moment, but it will get better. And that you just have to see what other role models you might have. Is there a teacher? Is there a sports coach? Is there a neighbor? Someone that you can have a good relationship with?
What I want to do is to look at how, at the original Dave Elman induction, and also at how we've had to make some changes over the years because of, there's a lot of touching, with the arm drop. But now, of course, we've got the situation of, is it politically correct to touch now? We've got COVID, and we've got a lot of sessions being done on Zoom, so you can't really do that anymore. And also the original induction was very direct. And it was a direct approach, and there are ways of making it indirect and more flowery and permissive, for some of your clients.
I thought when I was a hypnotherapist that everybody worked with dentists, because I worked with lots of them. But I was out in Dubai in the Middle East, the only hypnotherapist for in the whole of the Middle East. So people were coming in from all over to work with me. And it wasn't until I started going to the National Guild of Hypnotists and meeting a lot of other hypnotists that they were asking me, well, how come you have so many dentists coming to you? How come? I don't know, I just do. And I was working with everything from, people falling off horses and, having jaw alignment problems to, people, just kids with nail biting to all sorts of issues. And it was when I spoke in front of 450 dentists at a big conference in Dubai, and all the dentists following me out saying, where can I learn more about this? Where can I read about it, etc., that I was able to say, well, there are chapters in books, but there's no definitive book I can tell you to read about this. So I decided then that I would write the book. And I did.
If a dentist office approaches you about doing hypnosis, the first thing to understand is that if you already do hypnosis for other things, you probably can handle it. If you do hypnosis for anxiety relief, if you help your patients through other fears and such, the fact that you haven't maybe done a dental specific session shouldn't hold you back from doing a dental session, because the work you're going to do is basically the same. Now, of course, if they're going to hire you to go in and do a full-on surgery prep or something like Dr. Lemaire does, of course, you should have your bases fully covered. I'm talking about if they call you and say, hey, I need to refer you some patients who are smoking or who are nail biting or something along those lines, just the fact that maybe you haven't done some dental specific work doesn't need to hold you back from actually going in and doing, good work with the practice and learning as you go. Because that's the best thing, I think, learning as you go, growing with your skills.
First, know yourself. Second, know your outcome. Whatever your outcome is, you want your messaging to go to complement that. The third thing you want to know is your audience. Know your audience, because now you have who you are. You have the authentic presentation that you're going to make. And then you have your outcome. You want to educate. You want to build business, whatever your outcome is. You know your outcome. And then you know your audience, because your speech or your information to a women's group is likely to be different than your information to the golf center, which is likely to be different than your information to the school where you want to do some type of presentation.
So imagine now you're sitting where I'm sitting and you can see yourself on that Zoom screen. You can see yourself in that little rectangle. You can see the clothes you're wearing. And I want you to notice as you watch yourself on that screen, you are completely free of the useless, unnecessary pain. So when you're ready, I want you to slowly begin drifting back over into your body, only as quickly as your brain makes these changes at a physical level, a psychological level, and an emotional level that will give you freedom from the useless, unnecessary pain. And when you've done that, I want you to open your eyes and come back refreshed, revitalized, and ready. And let me ask you, that's right, the smile on your face, where's that pain gone now? Try and feel it and find you cannot. Where's that pain gone now? Let me know. Let me know in the chat. Try and find it. If it is gone, that would be great news.